Okay, and so welcome to everybody. I would first of all like to thank you, Joanna Siekiera, for having accepted to do this conference for us free of charge in her own free time. Thank you so much, Joanna. And a few words about Joanna. She's an international lawyer, a doctor of public policy from Poland. She works as a legal advisor to various military institutions, for example, the NATO Stability Policing Center of Excellence in Italy, or the Finnish Defense Forces International Center, and the United States Marine Corps Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare. Joanna did her postdoctoral research at the University of Bergen in Norway and PhD studies in New Zealand's Victoria University of Wellington. She's the author of many books and articles and legal opinions on international law, international relations, and security. Her areas of expertise are law of armed conflict and the Indo-Pacific region, and she's also specialist of international ocean law. So, Joanna, if you could explain how you would like to go about this presentation, the points you want to cover, and also when can students ask, and of course colleagues ask questions. I would like to invite everybody to write their questions in the chat. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. Panie I panowie, dobry wieczór I witam. Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir et bienvenue. It is my big honor to be here with you. My work is my passion, and I know that you have sacrificed your free time, your work time to be here with me today. So I wish all of you to learn something maybe new, maybe something from different perspective, as you are all interested into interculturalism. You are open to learn other perspectives. So legal perspective or international legal perspective, but also perspective of the law of armed conflict. Unfortunately, being very much on time nowadays in different parts of the globe. And again, my mission, my personal mission is to synthesize people, my students, my military students, officers I teach at various courses. So ladies and gentlemen, please mind, this is a short disclaimer, that my presentation and opinions stated today do not represent none of my employers or institutions with whom I cooperate, namely NATO, Marine Corps University, and more. Before I start, of course, I would like to thank Madame la Professeure Stella de Kock for having me tonight, for organizing this lecture. I met Professor in Paris in June upon the Theatre France annual symposium organized by my friend being here as well, Dr. Lidia Wiśniewska, and the chair of Theatre France, Dr. Grazia Ghelini. And I will now share a few slides for you to be aware what we are going to talk today. Yes, so those are the slides, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, yes, here is what you can see. I would like to emphasize the power of networking. Why I'm here? Because of my network. So I encourage all of you to use social media for your own benefit, to get new contacts, new perspective, to open your mind, to read some controversial even posts, but then you will ask yourself questions, why that person wrote that? From which legal background does that person come from? Because this is what I'll be talking to you, different approaches between the West and the East. Of course, it's generalization. There are always individuals in between, inside cultures, but to show you the mindset, why some legal norms written, for example, in a treaty, or oral customs, practices of states, of other actors, and they are being made because of certain people coming from certain legal cultures. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, please follow me, check me on LinkedIn, Twitter. Who I am, you already learned, so I will skip that part. Yes, as you can see here, I lecture. I'm an educator as well, but I also trained students on the way across the Pacific, from Fiji up to Palau, 2 months at the sea, as you can see here, without entering any harbor. That was very demanding, both physically but also logistically. The reason for that was to present students how different legal norms they function actually on the sea. So exclusive economic zones, sovereignty, territorial integrity. This is, yeah, I think that was the one of the most extraordinary experience in my whole life. That was very enriching, and I'm happy to share today with you. As Professor Krulak said, please ask me questions. I hope to deal with all of them. If not, we stay in touch online. And here is the outline of today's lecture. First, we will talk a bit about international law versus national law, because we tend to think that, well, the law is the law, but those branches are far different. They are built on different sources of law, of norms. They function differently. Why? We will go into that. Then we will talk about international humanitarian law, law of armed conflict, sometimes used as synonymous, but they are not, and human rights law. Then we will jump into my favorite, legal culture, because I can tell you, since the war in Ukraine, so many institutions reached me out, so I would explain what is the legal cultural background of this war. And the same with Hamas-Israeli war now. Again, wars between cultures, different mindsets, different systems of values. And then we go to lawfare. Lawfare, very modern word, I would say, and not used enough, not analyzed enough. When I give lectures about that to my military students, still this is not enough analyzed. We will also touch a bit of artificial intelligence. I think this is what everyone is really interested about. This domain is just getting its pace. It will move on, but it will move on not only for the peaceful meaning. So that's why we must be aware that artificial intelligence will be, maybe is already used for wrongful purposes. And finally, understanding the natural differences. Yes, we are all different, and this is natural, this is good. And why is it? Why mindsets are different? Why values are different? Because when we understand why, we know the way, as I learned recently. After 2 points, I will break the lecture and hear your questions. It will be read by Stilla, so I hope we will go smoothly during this hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will stop sharing here, so you would look at me now. Yes, international law and national law. First of all, we still live, ladies and gentlemen, in the time of Westphalian peace treaty arrangements. Check the history. I'm sure most of you are aware what was the peace treaty about. but the consequences of state-centric world we live still today. States are the entities in international law who are norm creators. States are primary, so first one, initial, who can create further institutions like international organizations. The example is countries. State sovereign countries created European Union. Not only this, but you can imagine that it doesn't go the other way around, that organization can create a state. No, those are sovereign states who can create norms, also via writing treaties, arrangements, regardless of the name. That's also another part of international law, so treaty law. And ladies and gentlemen, please mind that states, they would never put on their shoulders another burden. So that's why they are some kind of securizing their own needs, because again, every state is different. Every state has its own interest. Every state has its own resources. So we have all the conflicts, we have wars, because states are trying to leverage. They are trying to get more benefits, as for example, they were naturally not given. So on the territory that the government having the population, so again, three elements of calling a country a state, because again, for lawyers, a country doesn't equal a state. State is a sovereign entity, and country is not there yet. For example, the state of Palestine. It is such an example. International law, therefore, it does not have all the elements of national law. The most, I would say, drastic is the lack of obligatory judiciary. We don't have obligatory courts in international law. Courts are set only upon agreement. For example, you know, in The Hague, we have two international courts, International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, being an organ, so body inside United Nations. But to be a part of it, you have to be a part of the treaty establishing the court. Nobody another state cannot force. Yes, there is example, like for example, we had a Nuremberg court or tribunals in Japan or in former Yugoslavia and so on. But what is the weakness of it, ladies and gentlemen? So far in the history of international law, there was 0 heads of state being persecuted and punished by international court. The question, why is that? The answer would be political interest. Look at the Kenyatta president in Africa. You would see that he was persecuted by international courts, but guess what? He's still ruling as the president. Why? Because neighboring states decided it's not beneficial to have him punished. I can move on with those examples. The closest possible was Slobodan Milošević, but he died in arrest. So he never heard the verdict. So I always say, and please, if you wish, on YouTube, there are my lectures for US Army or US Marines, that I claim that international law system is weak, is lacking mechanisms. Why? Because states did not agree to do so. Are they able? Are they allowed? Do they have tools? Yes, they could, but they don't want that because it is called a two-edged sword. Sorry. So it means that if they would, punish something, they would also suffer from this kind of ban. And what is the most, another drastic example, international versus national law. In national law, ladies and gentlemen, we have a norm being based on 3 elements. So hypothesis, disposition, and sanction. If you do X in the circumstances of Y, you will be punished for Z. In international law, we have only those 2. What does it mean? We don't have an element of a sanction. So again, international law is built on a goodwill of states. We agree on something, believing that everyone who agreed, either at the international level, so United Nations, for example, or regional level, inside our regional organizations, or bilaterally, so only 2 or more countries who decided to do some international actions. How can sanctions be executed? Well, through another treaty, for example, cutting some economic ties, and so on and so on. And this is very important when we talk about international humanitarian law, ladies and gentlemen, and law of armed conflict. I love law of armed conflict. This is part of my expertise. Well, first of all, terminology. According to International Committee of the Red Cross, the proper name of this branch of law is International Humanitarian Law of Armed Conflict. So those 2 branches are put together. But in doctrine, in teaching, lawyers would divide into 2. So international humanitarian law is to protect civilians, protect civilian infrastructure, and also those the hors de combat, so they are those who are outside of the place of war fighting, for example, injured, who are not able to be, who are not able combatants, and law of armed conflict, which are methods legally justified to combat between the actors, between state actors, but also non-state actors. And we can see that non-state actors being either partisan groups or insurgeries or lonely wolves, terrorist groups, their influence is rising. So that's another thing, that we still live in Geneva Conventions, 1948. But ladies and gentlemen, when I was teaching that, learning that by heart, and then, now I teach this, this is anyhow suitable for modern era, because this is how many postcards and letters you're able to send to your family when you are a prisoner of war. But now we would ask about transfer, data transfer, or phone video call back home. And this is just a tiny example. And lastly, before I will ask for some questions, if we have some human rights law based on many international treaties, starting with Declaration of Human Rights and also covenants of rights of United Nations. We can enumerate a lot of them. Also Convention on the Rights of Children from 1989. So this is very important. We might say, okay, but what is the point? What is the point if some countries, yes, they signed but never ratified? Some countries, they have both signed and then ratified, so implemented to their national law, but they don't follow. And then I will say it's better to have those mechanisms than not to have, because sometimes it's beneficial for countries to be in. I am a pragmatic lawyer, and I would claim that even for the reason that some countries do not believe in some values, like protection of civilians, protection of women, special care for children, and so on, they would see that if they want to belong to good guys versus bad guys, it's proper, it's beneficial for their PR. So how do they present themselves on the international arena if they sign a treaty? I will stop here. And Scilla, do we have some questions? I cannot hear you. You are muted.
Yes. Okay. So I will go to the questions. So we have one from Carmel. Several members, including the Prime Minister of the current British government, have threatened to ignore or remove international law in several domains, for example, for refugees. How seriously are these statements being taken by the international legal community?
Yes.
And then, do you want to answer that and then I move on to the others, or do you want me to read all the questions?
Maybe you can read all of them. That would be quicker.
So that
yes.
would be one question. Then there is a question from Milana Pejic. Which branch of international law would you say will be in demand in the future? Then we have some questions from Alexandra Gaidamak. It is really sad that the people in the EU don't understand that the sanctions, I think she wanted to write sanctions against Russia, nowadays actually don't work the way the EU wished it could be, but rather they affect regular people who used to have nothing and they continue to have less. On the other hand, the people who have money and power, but especially money, they still live their luxury wars. Does it mean that the existing system simply does not work? Says this being Russian in the EU. We have a question from Antoine Adam. What's the most out-of-pocket, blatantly Geneva Convention breaking or overall just disconnected from reality proposition you have ever heard from an official? Okay, I can go back to the questions, Joanna, because that's a lot.
Thank you. It's okay. I was writing down. Thank you very much. Yes, first about statement of politicians. Well, again, wait until something is happening. We already learned that again, it's showing your posture, is showing your power that, yes, we are allowed to withdraw, because of course states are allowed to withdraw. Nobody is forcing any state to be in an international organization or in a treaty. As I said, international law system is based on voluntary basis. This is not like we have a national system that, yes, you have to follow criminal code, civilian code, family code, and other sets of norms in international law. It's not obligatory. So I think it's better, because would you expect countries to follow if they feel forced? No, they will live like exactly Britain did when it comes to European Union. So again, it's also showing flag that, hey, we are independent and we are able to do that. Just see the Turkish no towards Finland and Sweden to join NATO. Just see the tactics, political thing that they were able to play their own game, to say that, wait for us, this is up to us, this is our moment once in a lifetime to show that we are equal member of NATO and you have to wait for our approval, which is true. Everyone was waiting. Second question, future of international law, I would say, first of all, artificial intelligence. So how we will codify it, or maybe sum up some policies, some political decisions in this area, because it's not codified. And so far, I wouldn't say that there is much done in this regards, besides politicians talking, which leaves a big sphere for gray zone or even malicious illegal tactics. Second is migration. Of course, because of climate change, because of the conflicts, people will be migrating internally and externally, which poses a lot of legal dilemmas. Three, sanctions, and thank you to you, Alexandra, for that. I so much agree. Why sanctions were like this? Because states wanted them to be like this. If states really wanted to have hard sanctions, they would ban diamonds, they would ban gold, they would ban other sources, but as you can see, it's all politics in between. But again, as a lawyer, I don't want to touch politics. I can only observe, the legal maneuvers. And the last question was, have you ever heard from an official? Of course not. Officials will not propose any new I don't know, solutions, legal solutions. I would look to academia, which I also represent. So far, countries are not interested into that. As I said, they already have a lot of duties under myriad of international agreements, so they simply don't want that.
So in the meantime, some other questions. Can I ask them?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, from Zainab, in your opinion, how can the international legal system adapt to ensure accountability for transnational crimes and human rights abuses committed by state and non-state actors? And another one from Lou Fragner, is there a way to punish heads of states without being stopped by politics?
A very philosophical question. So congratulate to your students of being very action makers, which is profound and I admire. But again, I will not leave you, without any. I don't want to use a word naive, but like very hyper optimistic way of thinking, because ladies and gentlemen, politicians are making law. Those who are at our parliaments, at our congresses, seims, they make the law. They are the ones who create national legal system, and they sign treaties at the international law system. So how can you expect politicians doing something which is against their interest, but also against their voters? Because of course they do this for voting, for being elected, re-elected, and so on. So this is out of question even. And that question about how to adapt, in a sense that international law or law as such is a tool. How can tool adapt? This is us who create the law according to our needs and expectations. If the expectations are too low, nobody will even deal about that. Like I was sailing, you see the map across the Pacific Ocean, and the changes being now there towards Pacific Island states, how they might disappear or lose their territory. They do not bother countries which are not affected by sea level rise, which is obvious. So do you expect that those indirectly or not threatened by sea level rise would sign a treaty or hoped for signing a treaty or changing the UN Convention on Law of the Sea? Of course not. So please bear in mind different interests, different mechanism of countries, different resources they have.
And I just forgot one question from Alexandra Schmidt, who says, could you explain in detail the part about countries not seen as states from an international law point of view?
Yes.
She said that you use the term sub something.
So state and a country. We have the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States from 1933, which is originally made for South America. Those countries, after the process of decolonization, they were like, okay, so who we are? We regain dependence or independence after colonization, or we finally became independent, but are we sovereign or not? So they coined in Article 1 definition. What is a state? So an entity, to become a state, should possess permanent population. So it means that there is some amount of people living on a defined territory, not changing territory, but defined territory with a government. So some organism governing those people, populace on the defined territory. If you have 3 of them, plus you are recognized as a sovereign state, then you become a state. Example, as I mentioned before, some countries are not recognized as states, the state of Palestine, despite its name, but also, for example, Cook Islands, which are Cook Islands are part of New Zealand system. They are part of realm, so inside national system of New Zealand. They are not even part of United Nations. United Nations, just to remind you, contains 193 states. The latest baby, the youngest, is South Sudan.
Thank you, Joanna. So if there are no more questions, maybe we can go to the next 2 points.
Definitely. Thank you very much. You're very active. You're very open. I can see through names that you represent different legal cultures. You come from different countries. Therefore, you will have your lenses, right, of understanding law. And this is what I love the most in my job, which is legal culture. Culture, you all know what is. Legal, so coming from norms. Norms, they give rights on some entities and they give duties on others to protect, to execute those rights. So therefore, legal culture, and there is many definitions, of course, of legal culture, but I would say that this is all the scope of norms that are preferable, that they are codified, that they are sanctioned inside one culture. For one culture, some set of norms will be codified in a form of a code, a bill, parliamentary bill, but for some others, they would not even touch upon that. Another example, very drastic, are, for example, same-sex marriages. In some countries, they would be codified. Yes, you might get married with the same sex partner. With some others, it will not be codified at all. But with some other legal cultures, that is prohibited to do so, or even you might be punished when you do that. Another example, which I like to give, is walking on a red light, on a pedestrian crossing. In some countries, like for example, Great Britain, if no car is coming, you look around, nobody, you can walk on the red light. In some other countries, for example, Poland, it is prohibited. Policemen will come to you and give you a high fine for that. Why? Because of the mindset, because how we perceive the law, how was law executed by, like, through generations. Because, as you know, from history, Central Europe and Eastern Europe were occupied by the Soviet Union. So the understanding of the government is far different from Western countries who see government as someone who is trying to help them, to protect them, to give some norms, how to maneuver. But for some other countries, including my country, Poland, we see the government as someone who is imposing something not necessarily good for us. So that's why the understanding of law and acceptance of law is far different. And there are many examples of it, but I want you to use your imagination. Where do you come from? Where have you been living, working? You can see that people understand law differently. They obey or not law differently, and they justify legal system differently. They see it through their own lenses, through the lens of history, and their religion, lack of religion, philosophical system, economic growth, welfare or lack of it, aspiration, if they are able to do so or not. Another example, in our Western civilization, we must codify everything. We want to write down everything. But this is not the case, for example, for people in Oceania, because they sit down, you know, under the tent, they discuss and they have oral agreement. And this is fair enough for them to agree on something. Of course, as now we live in global village, so of course that has changed as well. But look at the mindset. For us, how we see the law, what is the law? If I ask you, you would say, well, there is a bill or there was a parliamentary decision, right? But law is also oral custom that countries practice something because they believe that that has legal consequences. Example, diplomatic law. If one country will expel ambassador or part of the diplomatic mission from another country, the same country will do the same because we are equal, we are sovereign. So we will do that even though it is not written in any code. This is not written in Vienna Diplomatic Convention on diplomatic relations, for example. And lawfare. Lawfare, my beloved lawfare. This word obviously comes from two English terms, law and warfare. So legal warfare, lawfare. So legal actions made during war fighting, during having armed conflict. Of course, not only conventional, old-fashioned way, but also unconventional hybrid warfare. And this is very interesting tactics, which is actually only codified by China. Chinese Communist Party is famous of using warfare. Many countries, many places, mostly you might be aware of South China Sea, but I witnessed that myself when I was sailing across the Pacific. But why do they do this? Why? And this is written in their code from early 1990s, that in order to pursue their ideology inside own country, so to internally convince their citizens, but also externally to share and spread their values to get more sphere of interest, they will use war fighting, but not conventional. So not tanks or fighter jets, but to think and use it with lawfare, with media or public opinion, so propaganda using social media, using TikTok, showing cute, movies, videos to show that China is a friendly state that has nothing to do with communism. They are fighting, bad Western countries, bad American hegemony, and also they will use psychological warfare. This psychological warfare is directed to decision makers, politicians, but not only politicians, ladies and gentlemen, because look at non-state actors, NSA. How about Facebook? How about Twitter? How influential they are on, for example, elections in the US. Not only there, in Poland recently, we also had some dramas 2 days before election. So those non-state actors, they're gaining power on politicians, on lobbyists, on private companies. So in this way, we are going. So this is still Westphalian state state, yes, the system of international law, but would state keep that, or non-state actors will be more influential? Let's see. And I think we can now have a short break for a question or questions if we have such.
Yes. So another question from Alexandra Gaidamak. What if such a thing as legal culture seems to not be there anymore in Russia? Just something that crossed my mind being mentioned by Dr. Siekiera, as the laws are just written by people just in order for one person or more probably to stay and have power and so on. Let me see if there is anything else. For the moment, this is one question we have.
So I disagree that there is no legal culture. There is just different. And what you are writing, what you're describing, because I myself, I've been to Russia. I love St. Petersburg. That's for me the most beautiful city I've ever been. And yeah, believe me, I visited every continent. So this legal culture, when it comes to Russia, comes from decades, ages of living under dictatorship. Either it was a Tsar, okay, who was keeping all, or she was keeping all the power for herself and or their court, or then Bolshevik, Lenin, Stalin, then presidents in the Federation of Russia. So therefore, for ordinary Russians, and I know people, I've been there, I'm Slavic, Russians are also Slavic, so I understand that way of like lack of ownership to have any influence on law, on executing norms. Of course, this is very sad. I feel you. I can read between the lines what you are telling me. But again, it all comes from mindset. Legal culture is like a mirror. It's mirroring the historical truths, because again, every country will have its own truth. So that's very delicate, but we must be aware of that. Why we have a different understanding of law, and I could really talk on and on about that. In every country we would witness different understanding of law, even among neighbors. Look at Poles and look Germans, for example. Stila, do you have some more?
Yes. So a question from Simon Koiba. What kind of cultural mindset do we find in international law? Does everything have to be in writing, for example? And does this change from one treaty to another? Another one from Alexandra Schmidt. You said in your introduction that lots of people contacted you about legal culture after or while the Ukraine war. Why was that?
Thank you very much for those questions. So when it comes to treaties, as I already explained, there are sources of international law being primarily agreements, because that's just easy. You go through the articles, you see, okay, this is the norm. Then you have international practice, so customs, how countries act, how they behave. And we have also sources of judges and other academic authorities. We have also principles, for example, of goodwill. I already mentioned that countries' entries into international relations, hoping that what will be agreed upon, every member of such agreement will follow. So as you can see, there is this whole variety of sources. Does this change? It's up to states. If they want to change a treaty, if they want to, for example, write an amendment or like annex to the treaty or additional protocol. So international law is moving. It's a tool. So this is how we change that. Usually first are the actions of countries, as I said, customs, practices, and then we change the written norm, not the other way around. Why those institutions contacted me about the legal culture in war in Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, because what I like to underline, and maybe this what you will bring, at least this sentence bring from this lecture, I'd be proud. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'll repeat, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Why? There were so many analysts, men, sorry, gentlemen, again, it's always the same that men will try to analyze conflicts from strictly military technical point of view. But war is not only about tanks and jet fighters, as I said. It's about different cultures, different mindset, different resources. Human factor is very often omitted, is neglected, forgotten, and this is wrong because it's about people who are suffering, who feel unfair, who are murdered as collateral damages. Collateral damages, so those actions which were not planned, for example, to destroy a military position, but there were some civilians around. So in order to destroy that particular military objective, civilians had to suffer. So this what we call collateral damages. So this is very important for me, and that's why I was talking about that since the beginning on the war on my social media, that the aspect of culture, of different mindset, legal culture of Russians and Ukrainians, why they are different, why this war is all about. Because again, for other countries, go west, they would see what is the difference between a Ukrainian citizen and a Russian citizen, right? This is very important. When we analyze Hamas-Israel war, different mindset, different legal backgrounds, different religion, different allies, different resources, different needs, different level of welfare. So you must all put all of that together to understand the conflict. If you do that, if you understand the reasons of the conflict, then you can prevent, then you can stop, then you can counter the conflict. But if you only focus on military technical features of the conflict, you are missing the case. You are missing the case, and conflicts will move on, or there will be some parts of countries being occupied. I've been to Georgia, I've been to Transnistria, I've seen that there is no war, but the country or the state, sovereign state, is cut into pieces.
So some more questions. Maybe I would just like to add one more thing when you mentioned, for example, Simon asked about international law and is it in writing, for example. I do remember, I think it was at the Conference of Parties in Paris. I think it was in 2015 when they decided on the not going above 0.2 global heating, and I clearly remember that the US, for example, did not ratify the text, and it went on for several days because of just, I think, a few words like should be or is it, because that word would have changed it into something legally binding, and they did not want it to be legally binding. So I think that is, I don't know, that might be an example as well of what you said about needs and interests of different states. So I have a question from Flora Philippe. What different cultures in law and life, with different cultures in law and life, how do we find together in the world concerning, for example, human rights. I'm thinking about Eastern systems where the focus seems different than in the Western world, absolutely. Or are they just being more honest in communicating their interests?
Mm-hmm.
So are human rights universal? Can human rights be universal? Maybe that is really the question here. Flora, am I analyzing your question correctly?
So yes, of course, human rights should be universal. Yes, because we should have bare minimum. Bare minimum. What we do extra is beautiful. It's fantastic. We go for it. We strive for it. But for example, to prohibit using child soldiers, that's already a thing. Already, putting by International Labor Organization that children should not work, that's a thing. Because of course, we don't have resources, we don't have means to check if seriously in every corner of the world any child is working. And we know that children are being misused to do so, but at least we have international standards. And of course, we can argue that what's the point when there are so many countries or inside countries, there are some regions, some cultures doing totally different thing. Yes, but again, when we give the example, most countries will follow for their own benefit to become part of the good guys, the good gang. And there was also interesting what you said, legal culture of the West and of the East, that yes, we do differ. And this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. Please mind that our Western civilization is built on freedom of individuals. Every right, every norm, every treaty is to protect our right, freedom to do X, Y, Z. But when we look at the Eastern cultures, Middle East or Far East, Oriental, Chinese, Japanese, they focus not on individuals, but on the community. Community is the value. So individuals must sacrifice. They must put themselves secondary, submissive to the needs of the community, being a village, being a family, being a state, ethnical group. The same in my beloved Oceania. This is again coming from, this comes from origins of their history of keeping together. For us Westerners, we are focused again on Western civilization of the Westphalian system. We are surrounded around nations. Yes, of course, we travel, we speak different languages, we mix and match our cultures. But again, our mindset is, I was born in that country, right? And for Eastern cultures, it's about the community. They represent the needs of the community. So that's also very interesting when we analyze legal cultures, West and the East.
Thank you. So a question from Mohamed. My question revolves around the cultural influence on law. At what point does a law made by a state become considered excessive to the extent that it forces international intervention? Specifically, under what circumstances might an international tribunal or jury feel compelled to intervene when a country enforces a law that is perceived as overtly imposing or incompatible with broader international legal norms?
That's a very, very long, complicated question. It requires, I would say, basic legal knowledge. I will not dive into it. It's not, the international law for beginners. But I will only say that, again, there is no judiciary, obligatory judiciary. So it is not like we have in our national systems that you can suit a file to a court as a citizen, or state will do that when you, for example, have stolen something. In international law, it doesn't work like this. There is no international policeman who would arrest you, who would check that. Yes, we have Europol, Interpol, but this is different because this is arrangements among countries. They agreed to exchange data to chase criminals. But again, to establish international court, for example, ad hoc criminal tribunal against one country, for example, just say against Russia in Ukraine, we would have international consent. Countries would need to agree. Will they agree? No, because of political issues, right? They think about resources to build up relations with Russia, post-conflict relations. We've seen that in other conflicts too. States really have short memory because they think about their own existence. They want to secure good existence for their own citizens, of course, for their own needs. So therefore, they are not that willing to establish tribunals, because guess what? If we will do that now, and somebody else will do a tribunal against us in the future. So again, it's a double-edged sword, as I said at the beginning.
Thank you. So actually, there is no international law that is above state law, right?
I wouldn't agree that way, but yes, we cannot compare that. That there is international law and national law. They function differently. They function differently.
So a question from Elise Miller in response to the point about how culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Good, you remembered, thank you.
Have you seen a corresponding shift in military training or education to enhance focus on cross-cultural knowledge and understanding? It seems that commonly individuals who enroll in the military have a lot of nationalism, to the point they may be less likely to be able to see across cultural barriers, which I imagine could be very problematic given what you are saying.
Well, first of all, don't put people into categories that militaries are this or that, because I can say the same thing about academia or my fellow lawyers. No, it's everywhere. But what you are asking, was there any shift in thinking? I would say that why my posts or why my lectures are that eagerly listened to or quoted after, because nobody talks about that. Everyone, as I said, is focusing on military tactics, on hard skills, but not soft skills. Still, law is seen as some sweet, fluffy thing, not as a weapon, not as a tool of war. And ladies and gentlemen, it is already being treated that way, not by the Westerners. This is, again, very interesting that adversaries to our democratic free world, based on freedom of speech, on transparency, the rule of law, we are unable to do that. This is what drives me crazy. This is what actually is my motto to learn, to teach further, to give my expertise, because I am probably the first one. When I give those lectures to my students, civilian and military, they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. But nobody ever talked about that legal, cultural aspect of conflicts. Yes, maybe they were somewhere, in the background of big analyses presented by politicians or geostrategists or some other analyst, but this is not on the first page. And I would argue that please understand your perpetrator, understand your enemy, why they are doing what they are doing, what is, you know, driving their motives, what kind of rationale do they have, on which basis. Is it, again, history? Is it their background of, you know, former system, being occupied or occupying, being a colonizer or being a colony? It all creates why. And again, if you don't know your why, you will never get your way.
So a question from Amaury: how can international law, which is placed above, and national law coexist on the topic of environment, for example, when each country is confronted to unique challenges? How can general progress be made when no general measures can be taken?
So when you say general measure, I would understand it at the universal level, so globally, transnationally, for example, at the level of United Nations. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I am a strong believer in regionalism, regional cooperation. We might hate our neighbors, but again, they are far closer to our thinking, our legal culture, our values, than those living on the other side of the globe. So why would we expect people on the other side of the globe sharing different sets of values to, you know, help us and sign the treaty? We might, of course, expect that, we might hope for that, but again, being pragmatic lawyer, I would say, no, don't be naive, don't wait, because some problems, like those problems of people of Oceania, sea level rise, they cannot wait. They cannot afford waiting until at the universal global level, we will do something with it. So what do? They arrange regionally. And actually, that was part of my postdoctoral research in Norway, that those countries, and now there are 13 countries who deposit. So they went to UN Commission on the limits of continental shelf, and they deposited their maritime boundaries. So whatever will happen to their islands and islets, archipelagic islands, they will be safe, because again, in international law of the sea, we calculate from the land, from the baseline, 200 nautical miles to demarcate the exclusive economic zone, so the territorial waters. So for our states' needs, economy, for research, and so on and so on. So this is this example how countries can cooperate inside the region, how to come to a consensus between neighbors, instead of waiting until we will have this agreement at the international level, because sometimes we might not get this consensus. Just look at the General Assembly voting. No matter the case, there will be countries, you know, totally no, totally yes, abstained. So it means, again, it's so hard to get agreement. And even if we will have agreement, there are no ways to execute, to check who is following, who is not, who is obedient. Maybe there are, but again, due to political reasons, countries will not do that. They will not check who is a good or who is the bad guy.
And I'd just like to make a comment about about national law and different cultural lenses we see national law, through which we see national law. I remember you mentioned in June when we met that certain laws that we consider very progressist and conform to our free mindset around freedom and personal liberty are actually seen as decadent by other cultures. I'm thinking about notably same-sex marriage or rights for gay people, which for our democracies are seen as advances, and whereas in other cultures, certain maybe more to the east, they are advertised as the decadence of Western civilization.
Yes, definitely. That's why I never judge. Well, who am I to judge, ladies and gentlemen? I, as a lawyer, focus on those differences. Why we have those differences. This is, I think, the biggest fun in following the track. Why some norms are codified and why are not in other cultures.
Thank you, Joanna. So maybe we can move on to the last part of your presentation.
Definitely, ladies and gentlemen. Again, thank you for your questions. You're very open. You are eager to learn. I'm very proud of you. And yeah, good luck. Keep on going, not only on this lecture, but in your further career. AI, artificial intelligence, at the time of peace and war and time in between. Because we are now in this phase of international relations that most conflicts, they are frozen. They're not wars per se, as you would imagine, again, with tanks on the streets, but there are economic struggle, rivalry, some actions on the sea. And again, China versus the Philippines, you can observe that. Some tests, like countries are testing how far can they go before that will cause effects, either in like as a reaction, or maybe it will trigger to use self-defense, and then that would be excuse for another country to start the conventional war. And I claim that artificial intelligence, that's another way, another tool which can be used for the good and for the bad. We are now focusing, unfortunately, on good use of AI in the time of peace. I can give you an example. I was invited to Zurich 2 weeks ago on a conference, AI Policy Summit, and participants, experts, I admire all of them. They were talking about exactly AI in the peacetime, but well, I don't mind being a bad guy, you know, and I was like, well, guys, congratulations, but we are talking about good usage of AI, but how about our adversaries? Undemocratic regimes, lonely wolves, terrorist groups, they are debating now how to use AI against us, and we are not prepared. We are not talking about codification of AI. We are not talking about regimes either, again, at the universal level or regional levels. Yes, there is a policy by the European Union, but then again, it affects only European Union member states. So this is again a step towards this policy building, but not that much, ladies and gentlemen. I see that again as a big threat, if not the biggest, because again, using, for example, robots during war fighting. Who would be responsible if robots would not obey international humanitarian law or law of armed conflict mentioned in the previous part of this lecture? We would say, yeah, of course, that would be the human who would be operating that robot. Yes, but we are going to that phase that artificial intelligence, so AI will decide to shoot or not to shoot, to execute or not to execute. We want to train robots to that extent that human intervention would be closer to zero, if not zero, because this is why we have robots. So we would not have to work or at the hostilities, so that soldiers, humans, would not be used anymore. So again, it causes a lot of legal dilemmas, questions in which way to go. And again, as we already said, that there are natural differences, different mindset, different values. So countries, but also non-state actors, they talk about AI, they participate in this technological pace with different causes, with different resources. And before the lecture, me and Sila will talking about deep sea mining. That, well, ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you that in the Pacific Ocean at the sea bottom, the resources are so expensive, so rich, that I can only imagine, I also claim that the future war, the future conflict, world war, will happen in the Pacific because of those resources. So there will be war for resources. So far, technology is not there yet to dig in, to grab those resources and to use them. But once technology is so advanced to do so, yes, well, we don't have legal norms about that, because we, according to UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, those areas outside of national sovereignty, so beyond national sovereignty jurisdiction, they are so-called high sea, so open sea for everyone. So the common heritage for humankind, for humans, so everyone can use it. But again, who can use it? The ones who have resources, who have such technology. So I can only imagine that there will be again war between those largest actors having access, having this technology, science on their side.
So shall we go for the questions?
Yes, please, the last set of questions.
Okay, so anything about artificial intelligence and as Joanna mentioned, how it may be used as a weapon by non-state actors and states as well, and how to regulate that, especially if what we hear today is that basically international law is not really effective in terms of banning or punishing. So that seems to be a very bleak future for us in that respect.
Yes, and again, I I always leave my students a bit sad when I give those examples. But again, my point is not to, you know, you to like me. I'm not here to be liked. I want to spread the truth. I want to tell you how it is really, how international law works, or it does not work, and why is it. So you would be aware. The knowledge is the key. So I want to give you this this knowledge, regardless if you like it or not. And the question is how to regulate, and how about not to regulate. Ladies and gentlemen, look at very similar sphere of artificial intelligence, or rather part of it. Sorry. Cyber security. There is no international treaty about cyber security. Therefore, there is no internationally acknowledged and accepted definition of a cyber security or a cyber threat. And when I ask my students to tease them, okay, how do you think that there is no definition? And they, after listening to me talking about legal cultures, they say, oh, because they have different understanding of it. I was like, yes, this is one of it. This is one part. Then they go, okay, maybe it's hard to get consensus, so countries are not willing. I was like, yes, that's okay. We're going in a good direction. Ladies and gentlemen, how about countries doing this purposely? They do not wish to codify that. because we would be giving cyber criminals a gift. Look, there is definition of a cyber threat. Cyber threat is XYZ. If you do this in the condition of that, that is cyber threat. So criminals are not stupid, okay? They would see, okay, so if I don't do this or that from that definition, therefore I will act at the threshold below the definition, then I have clean hands. I haven't committed a cyber crime. Do you see the reasoning? If we codified something, we are indicating what is good, what is bad. Of course, we cannot interpret law like this, because then we will live in anarchy without definitions. The definitions are needed. But again, we always forget that criminals, war criminals, they're not stupid, they're not idiots. They've already, disobeyed, they breached the law. They know how to breach the law. They go exactly where something is missing when they know that they will not be punished, right? So this is very important. And that's why I encourage my students or course participants to think like the perpetrator, to think like the enemy, like your adversary, because only then you will see how to commit a crime. So that would be beneficial, with whom to cooperate, what kind of resources to use, because we expect, and that's the weakest point of the Western civilization, that everyone on the globe will follow the law we follow. We expect others to follow the law we follow. No, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't work like this. We hope it to be, but no, as you already learned and you already initially, I would say, knew before coming here, countries, states, actors, they have different understanding of international law, of norms, of their benefit, and also different ways of achieving that. Thank you.
So a question from Lou. Isn't it dangerous to give artificial intelligence complete controls on war, as it could be hacked by another party, like terrorists, and no one could be legally punished? And from Maral Esmaili, it is disappointing. There is no international law related to surveillance by artificial intelligence, like the surveillance of artificial intelligence in Iran, for example.
Yes, very good questions. Thank you for this. First of all, it's dangerous. Yes, of course it is dangerous. Yes, it is alarming. I keep saying that it can be hacked, of course. Therefore, we must prevent. We must use our resources, our experts, engineers, data scientists, but also lawyers, but also people dealing with ethics, with philosophy, international lawyers, to protect our values. Because at the end of the day, every war is a war for values, our mindset, our set of norms, our principles, which principles will obey after the war is over. So of course, I would like to have more AI prevention, AI codification, and AI policy decision making. We are not there yet. The technology itself is being developed, but loosely, separately by private companies, again, who are starting to give their own expectations, right? And when it comes to surveillance by artificial intelligence, well, of course, there is no such thing that artificial intelligence, or on some, sci-fi movies, that robots will decide and there will be no human control. I don't even imagine such situation. That would be a big loss of humankind once we do that. So we need to keep in mind that this is for our own human benefit, so nothing against us. But when it comes to surveillance of artificial intelligence in Iran, wow, that's a very good question. I like that. But again, talk to Iranian government or representative. I had on one of the conferences. That was a very interesting experience, and that person's perspective was that they do so much in counter drug trafficking that basically that person was justifying some actions to do so. So again, that was interesting for me to learn another person's perspective, and I will stop here.
Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, I think we will say thank you to all the participants. Thank you for all your very interesting questions. And most of all, thank you, Joanna, for having taken the time to open our minds about international law and the issues around international law. So peace is maybe just an ideal in our world, unfortunately.
Thank you again, Stilla. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all of you. So many came for having me here. I hope that I gave you some light upon some international law obstacles. Really, I am very, very grateful and honored to be in such international, intercultural crowd.
Thank you. So we will stop there. I will stop the recording.